teaching, real life, and learning in the ministry. And of course, it is not impossible to do this in the structure of a residence school. So it can be that you have a residence school where the teachers have a much, much closer relationship to their students than a TEE program which is running for 20 years and which is successful and nobody is thinking about the real reason behind it. But in principle, these are the theological reasons. I have put this out in detail in my book, World Mission Heart of Christianity, my article, Jesus as Master Educator. I have bought only 2 copies of this free books prospectus, where you will find not only books for myself, but a lot of other books too, and you can order them for free. The only thing is that the airway didn't allow me to bring boxes and boxes, so I only have 2 copies to have a look into it. Perhaps you can photocopy, you only need to photocopy the order page. Yeah, that's the only thing. And feel free to write to the email there, Titus Vogt, who is handling this, will be happy to help you. There are 3 categories: simple books, sophisticated books, and very specific books for theological training institutions. And the first category you can order in bulk copies. The second you can order for your students, pastors, etc. And third, normally it's only of interest to put it into libraries or for teachers themselves. So one thing you can get there is this book, which contains the details of Jesus as Master Educator. Second, there are, and for me personally, among those spiritual reasons is the problem where I started out. In a movement that is growing, many people are too old for a normal formal education. I remember when I started to study at theology. We started together in our seminar with 50 students, and we all were 18 or 19, and we all came from a Christian family. Because if you want to study for ministry when you are 18 or 19, you rarely became a Christian with 17. If you confine theological training to the first professional training of people 17, 18, 19 years old, you totally rely on children from Christian families. This did not work when I studied, but it surely doesn't work nowadays. If we only wanted to rely on those kind of people, we would lose the game anyway. We need to get involved. And you know, I have been in traditional schools, and again, please don't quote me afterwards and say he said TEE is always the Holy Spirit personal and traditional school are from the devil. I mean, I don't say something like this. But I have been working through the traditional system. And the reason why I skipped out and we started totally new mainly was that after some years I found out that I did not train the leaders. What do you mean with this? A vast majority of the students I was teaching never went into ministry. I did influence them, but I did not influence the world through them. While at the same time there were a lot of strong leaders in our churches which never had been through theological training. And I thought to myself, why in the world should I train people who never will use what I tell them? why do not train those who are leaders already? And where I'm sure they really will use what I teach them immediately. We just had a ceremony in Switzerland where we started 3 years ago, and Hangel was the first student to finish there. And my Swiss friends, they are sad that they have so few students. They would like to be a big institution. And so we only had one alumni, this Hangel. And after I had conferred him his degree, I go together with our Swiss board and I asked them, do you think that all the effort for only one person was worth it? And they all were totally convinced. Why? Because this man, during his studies, has become the foremost Christian blogger in Switzerland, who daily writes his blogs, which is read by Christians and non-Christians, and has become a part of Switzerland. This is the kind of people I want to influence. That while they study, they already influence others. I mean, I don't say that everybody preparing for the ministry should become a blogger. That's up to the gifts of the Holy Spirit, what your special task will be. Yeah? But if you have somebody like this and you influence him directly, I told the board, if we would have the chance to choose him versus 20 people, a nice celebration, a big celebration in the end, and the 20 just disappear again, I always will choose the one that has been active in the ministry while he was studying. He really can put into practice everything we teach him. He can build up his leadership abilities, and I think it's those people we need in the long run. Then, of course, second, there are practical reasons for TEE. I don't know the very thin line between the two things, don't misunderstand me, but there are practical reasons. One reason is money. I know that some people don't like to talk about money and have this as a reason, but you just have to see we don't have the money to train all the leaders we need. We just don't have it. We don't have it in Germany, which is a rich country. And you surely don't have it in a country like Nepal. We just don't have the money. That's a fact. Yeah? We don't have the money for the many buildings we would need if we would calculate the 35 to 40,000 Christians a day who come from a non-Christian family. And we would calculate how many leaders, I'm not talking about pastors alone, yeah? I'm talking about how many leaders we need to help them. You come up with numbers which you technically and financially never can run to solid resident institutions. This is just a fact. Whether the first kind of reason, spiritual reasons, is right or wrong, the second is just a fact. So, the second is, we cannot afford to take all the potential leaders out of the local churches. We cannot afford it. You see, when I left my local church when I was 18 years old, I left a church which could do without me. Why? Because it was a church of second and third generation Christians. To be frank, the church did not grow. To be frank, it was not a very attractive church. But this church did not need me. It still exists. It still doesn't grow. It still is not very attractive, but it still exists. If you rely on the given Christian population and you think a church is just keeping this alive. So in the statistics, to assure that every year you have the same level of people. Okay. But this is a luxus, this is a situation you do not have in many countries of the world. You even do not have it everywhere in the West. There still are some areas where you have it like this. The Bible Belt, which in itself already says that this is no longer true for all of the United States of America, but for certain areas. Even in Germany it's not true, and I tell you in a Western country like France, it surely is not true. In many Western countries we have a large lack of Christian leadership, and we don't longer have the situation of 50 years ago where we had enough people that were trained automatically, because in most Christian families it was taken for granted that one of the kids would study theology. You see, I come from a family that goes back to Reformation times. And in this family, since Reformation, it was clear that always the first or the second son had to study theology. And there were many families like this. It was a given for a Protestant family, so to speak, to pay to, not the tithes, but to pay one of the kids to go into ministry. And it functioned, not only in my family. It functioned in Germany. There always were enough pastors. I don't say there were enough good pastors, but there were enough pastors. But you understand that does not function any longer. That doesn't function with my kids. I cannot tell my kids, for 500 years in our family, always somebody has studied theology. So I have a daughter and a son. The daughter says, I'm a female, so the son, probably nowhere in the world this functions any longer. That you tell your kids, because of a long tradition, you have to become a priest, or you have to become a pastor. That doesn't function any longer. But we have Western countries where the situation is even worse. And that means, when I take France, for example, in France, for the first time in history, the evangelical community is growing. Not very fast, but it is growing. And from all our studies, we take it for granted that in every local church, there are one, by the best, two people who can be leaders in the church. And it's not many churches in France, you know, it's a very atheistic country. So we have calculated that if we take around 110 to 120 of those leaders out of the evangelical churches in France, virtually all local churches are left without leadership. And that would be just one seminary, wouldn't it? So we may open one seminary, put all the people into it, feel good for having so many students of theology, and those people would be desperately needed in the local churches. And this is why we in the moment are discussing in France, where there is no TE program, with the two evangelical residence schools that are there, who themselves see the problem. How we can build up a TE program for all those who are in leadership in those churches already. So it's no longer a Southern problem or a problem of persecution, it's a problem in the Western countries too. We just cannot afford to take the people out of the local churches. And as we are talking about Asia nowadays, today, I think if this is anywhere true, it's in Asia. I know so many, traveling, I know so many situations where taking one person out could bring the whole thing in danger. It's not always the case, and we are thankful to God if it is not the case. It is not a good situation, of course. A church shouldn't have just one leader and that's it. Yeah? But nevertheless, the number of Christians is growing in many areas so fast that this is actually the situation. And we cannot afford to take all those people out. These are just practical reasons. I mean, they bind into the first reasons, of course, but if you don't buy into the first reasons, it's a very practical reason why we need to think about it. And then third, there are reasons which were not thought of in the 1960s, which have come to us during history. Number one, there is the question of unity. We definitely have to discuss what the World Evangelical Alliance is there for, that we need a larger unity among Christians and especially among evangelicals. And we need to find ways of theological education which do not bring us against each other, which do not give us a mark of I have my education there and this is why I'm different, but where we can really mix with each other. And I think DEE is a very practical solution to it, because people are in the ministry, and if you are in the ministry, you know you have to work together. Number two is the whole question of persecution. In Guatemala, in the 60s, DEE was invented as another way to do theological education. It was not invented as a way to do theological education under persecution. But 50 years later, this is an everyday situation for our churches. Praise to God for every Asian country where you can do your training in public without any problems, but there are enough countries where you cannot do it. And theological education is a way of training which you can, I would not say hide, but which you do not need to make so public, which is not so visible to the government, which is not so visible in the life of somebody. If he has a job, he always can say, this is my job, and that he is training for the ministry, he does not need to mention. If he doesn't do anything else, that's much more difficult. Persecution has come up as a totally new topic, and for me is a major reason why we have to invest in theological education by extension. And I don't need to be a prophet to see that the number of evangelicals living in difficult situations under discrimination or even persecution is on the rise. The percentage of those compared to the rest of the world is on the rise. And therefore, we do not have to not only to invest in a theology of persecution. And you know, a theology of persecution never is a theoretical theology of persecution. If there would be persecution, then we should. But persecution always means you are in the real ministry. You experience what the Church of God can experience. And we need to react to it. I already told some, half a year ago, we had the first ever meeting of the Theological Commission, the Religious Liberty Commission, and the Missions Commission, a joint consultation. The text will come out shortly, and the topic was theology of persecution. Because who is responsible for it? Is it a mission problem? After all, it's mission that produces the problem. You understand? It's a vital topic for the mission community. It is a topic, of course, for the Religious Liberty Commission, because the worldwide Christian body has to help those that are persecuted, and we have to help them by prayer, by becoming active, but also by using all legal and political means that still are open to us. But it's also a basic theological problem. It is, you all know, persecution is no accident. Such a nice Christianity, and then this happens. But it was promised from the very beginning that it happens. The abnormal situation is the one in which I live. If you compare the first century of Christianity, if you compare history of Christianity, if you take the present situation, I, living in a free country, that can preach any nonsense on the street and nobody will do something about it. Yeah? I am the unnormal situation. Persecution is the normal situation. Don't misunderstand me. We don't say, as some in the early church did, that we search for persecution. The New Testament reminds us again and again that persecution never should be something which we look for. Surely nothing which is a result to our evil doing. New Testament very clearly says, if you do evil and you get persecuted, then it's no persecution as a Christian. It is something you deserve. Romans 13, 1 Peter 3. Yeah? We don't look after it. We pray for persecution to go away. Even if we look in the New Testament, we have the right to flee persecution. It's a very old discussion in the early church. When persecution comes, should you stay or should you flee? Should the pastor stay with his church or should he flee that he can help from the outside? And it was never answered. And if you look into the Bible, the prophets in the Old Testament didn't know. Some did flee, some stayed. Jesus didn't know. Most of his life, he fled. Yeah? Knowing that persecution would come, he went to another area. At the end of his life, by purpose, he went into the middle of persecution. Yeah? So, it's even not that we easily could answer the question that we always have to stay in the middle of the persecution. This is something everybody has to discuss with his Lord for his own life. But we know it is a normal situation in the sense that Jesus has been persecuted and promised us that we will experience the same. So in theological training, I spoke about this consultation of the three things. In theology and in theological training, persecution cannot be a subject which in the end shows up. Here we have our nice systematic theology and we speak about everything, and then in the end we have to speak about persecution. But you cannot present persecution, you cannot present your systematic theology if you do not speak about the suffering of Christ. And you cannot speak about the suffering of Christ if you do not speak about the suffering of the church. I hope that this consultation will help us a lot, but I urge you really, number one, to see TEE as a much needed answer for theological training under persecution. And number two, to really make the whole topic of persecution not only part of your theology, but of theological training. And this brings me to the third. I have called this fundamentalism. We live in a strange world. This world becomes globalized, and with globalization, the arguments for or against us become global. The most typical example was Terry Jones, who wanted to burn a Quran. A stupid man somewhere in an American village who for 2,000 years, how old is America? For 500 years, nobody would have taken notice of. In a globalized world, this brings us in the middle of all our topics, in the middle of persecution, knowing if this man really burns the Quran, thousands of Christians probably will have to pay for it when Muslims go against it. It brings us into the middle of a media world, the whole world reporting about it and blaming it on fundamentalistic evangelicals. And we have to counteract. Why do I mention fundamentalism here? I know that we are in a very delicate situation, especially when it comes to our relationship to Islam. Christianity in the last 50 years, not only evangelical Christianity, but Christianity in the overall picture has become more peaceful year by year. The symbolic act was when the Pope dismissed his Swiss guard. I mean, they still are there, the orange and so, but they no longer have any weapons. The Pope nowadays is guarded by the Italian police, no longer by his own people. Even so, he has his own state, so he would have the right to have his own soldiers. He no longer has one policeman. No citizen of the Vatican bears a weapon. They are protected by the Italian police. This is just a symbol for it, that even the Catholic Church more and more has totally given up to be involved in war or in anything that has to do with violence and pressure. We are at the moment in the middle of, or better near the end of what we call an ethic code of mission, which is a year-long, 3-4 years long project now between the Vatican, the Catholic Church, the World Council of Churches, and the World Evangelical Alliance, which has to do with this whole topic, how we do mission peacefully and without putting pressure on anybody in a world where at least wings of other religions, especially of course Islam, use more and more violence and pressure, even in mission. This is a hard topic. Why? Because if I take Indonesia and you have Christian villages and a Muslim jihad army comes along with machine guns, it is easy for me in Germany to tell my Indonesian brethren and sisters, don't defend yourself. Yeah? Christians don't use weapons and go against it. I know this. And I know that I cannot take the place of the father in Indonesia who has to decide whether he defends his family against people like this or not. But in the overall picture, we know that it is the essence of Christianity, not just a good idea, but the essence of Christianity, that we do not get back into times where we had armies and weapons, etc., etc. We try to get protection from the state, wherever possible. And if a state does not want to protect us, we try to get other states to put pressure on the state. And sometimes that helps. But if we are left alone, yes, we have the problem that it is easy for Muslim or other attackers, knowing if they burn our church, they do not need to fear that machine guns from the church shoots back. They know it's an easy time. You can see this in Iraq. Yeah? The fundamentalists could not win against the Americans, so they targeted the Christians who had no clue how to defend themselves. Would you have an idea? If suddenly 10 people with a machine gun would come and wanted to kill you, would you know how to defend yourself? Does your church have self-defense courses for those things? Or how to use a weapon? No, we don't have it, and we are glad that we don't have it. That makes us easy targets. Why do I mention this? We need a theological training that helps people to live in the strange world which we have today, where we have fundamentalists around who go against other people with violence, where we ourselves, by the press, are often put into this corner, as if we would do the same, where even mission, just telling other people what you believe, often is seen as fundamentalism, because people do not distinguish that the real problem is the violence involved. Not that people of different religions live together and tell each other what they believe. Especially the relationship of Christianity and Islam, and to a certain extent also of Christianity to fundamentalism in Hinduism, will be one of the biggest questions we will have in the future. And we need leaders who are able to lead the church in the middle of this mess. That anything you say suddenly could be in the newspaper tomorrow. Any discussion you have suddenly may become a political problem. And I really urge you Because here in Asia, of course, you have several countries in which this has become a day-to-day business, and in which we need to develop leaders